Okay, bom dia. Okay, thank you again. What are you going to do? Louis wants me to continue in Portuguese, but I think I might speak too fast for all of you to keep up, so for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to keep it in English. Welcome back to session 2 of the conference. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Christopher Ludwig. I'm the editor of the Automotive Logistics Group, which means I'm responsible for the content in the magazines and on the websites, and also work closely with Louis on the conference. Really pleased to be back in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, with all of you. And many thanks already to our first set of panelists. I think it was a really interesting opening. I think to me the message was quite clear, which is that Brazil needs to compete globally, and for it to compete globally, it needs to compete on logistics as well. There seems to be a direct relationship between the logistics and export potential, and as well as within the domestic market. So a lot of interesting and useful things to start off there, which leads us, I think, quite importantly into this session, which is going to be looking at managing the automotive supply chain in South America, particularly in the context of mitigating risk, increasing flexibility, reducing inventory and logistics costs, all the things that indeed will make Brazil more competitive. Let me introduce our panel before I make a few more remarks. We're very pleased to have both our panelists today, Fred Roldan, who's the supply chain director for South America, General Motors, and also Alex Feijolo, Director of Business Development for GEFCO Brazil. We're going to have 2 presentations. We're going to have a presentation from each, and then hopefully plenty of time for Q&A. There's plenty of other participants in the room who should certainly be able to speak to this topic. Before I invite Fred up, I want to just make a few words. I think, perhaps I should have assigned this in advance as a kind of homework assignment, is to read the article which is in the copy that you all got. You should recognize this gentleman on the cover, Edgar Pezzo, who's currently the head of global logistics for General Motors, was previously vice president global purchasing supply chain in South America, certainly one of your countrymen. And if you read the article, I think there's just some points he made which are quite interesting, particularly about how the South American experience is informing how he approaches managing a global supply chain, or let's say managing global markets. In many ways, the context of the Brazilian supply chain, be it weak infrastructure, high customs, high costs, high risks, and managing that complexity seems to have really been important to understanding how to deal with other markets. It's one thing in North America or Europe, but now looking at Indonesia, India, Africa, the Brazilian experience has been kind of vital in that, and looking to localize suppliers and improve logistics on that side. Incidentally, just before in the coffee break, I learned that the head of global supply chain planning at Coca-Cola, I think Paulo Mendes is the name, is also a Brazilian. So it seems to be something about the Brazilian experience which maybe if you can figure it out here, you can kind of make it anywhere. So just a kind of interesting point, I think, to kind of start us at, because I don't have to point it out to you. You do face obviously some particular supply chain issues here, high imported content. At the same time that the supply chain is getting more complex, there's higher part numbers, more competitive environment, global products which are built here, which are connected to other markets, whether it's global platforms shared across Thailand or Europe or North America. And I think with more OEMs coming into the market, as we heard in the last session, maybe 23 assemblers by the end of the decade, I think that's only going to increase. So again, it comes down to making the supply chain competitive in a global context. So the topics we address here, there'll be some technical things, whether it's on IT or whether it's material presentation, implant logistics, but it also comes down to some of the basics like good communication and partnership with your suppliers and with your providers. So just some of the thought starters from my side. I'm pleased now to invite Fred up to give his presentation, and then we'll go from there. Thanks, Fred.
Bom dia a todos. Hoje eu
Morning.
gostaria de falar
I would like to address something more practical and different. I'll talk about risks in the supply chain, but more than measure risks and say what are these risks. You experience this in your daily routine, but let us talk about the tools we use and we believe that we use in GM, and we believe that not only in GM, but it's one of the important approaches so that we won't face risks as a victims. Gustavo has mentioned, he said to be the protagonists of the process, not victims of what is going on. I comment here, if you just regret, we don't go on. So it's important to see tools and address and approaches to do something more practical to address risks. I will explain the complexity we manage in the supplies, in the chains in GM. We have a network of suppliers across the several platforms we assemble. Several of our employees listed here are related to this chain, and they receive more than 1,200 trucks in our plants and dispatching containers dealing with vast amounts of money. So it's quite complex. If we look the chain, the supply chain, this is one of the most complicated chains that we have. One of the links here, the link of a supplier in the first layer, international layer, where he comes. This is the origin, and he crosses several providers till he reaches the destination in our plant. So there is always a transmission of responsibility, transportation. This is complicated. We have the international transportation here. We have difficulty at the customs. This is one of the examples of a link, a very complex one. If we think what is the supply chain, we have this in a sort multiplied. You have tier 1, it is this link that expands to other tiers to form this chain. If we think about what is a car, this would be to one part. Imagine what should be to the thousands of parts we have. Some links are easier than others, not all by an international level, but this is a very common format we have in the chains. We have to know how to deal with this. And we deal without repeating what has been already said in a structure that it's not perfect. We continue in logistics with constraints at ports, as Gustavo has mentioned last year. We have the highways, you have the roads. See the roads we have here, these are not highways. These are real roads that are not paved, that of 6% that is demanded. The airports are completely busy. We have the strikes in service providers of the government, the officials of the government to go on strike. And although multimodal is not universal, although it is universal, we don't have a good solution to the industry. These are what we live in our daily life. Besides all this, we have macroeconomic and geopolitical risks. We have to deal with situations that are connected to a larger context. We have risks such as commercial relationship between suppliers, efficient planning. You associate that to risk and operational risks of structure, and these chains are full of risks. What is our approach? The approach has to be proactive. We have to think, anticipating the risks and considering what I have to do. And this has to consider three dimensions. First, what is the mission of this circle of control? The first, what we can control? What can I, in my task, can I control? What I don't control, but I can influence, and what we cannot control or influence. But eventually I can get prepared to scenarios and mitigate these risks to preparation. So we have to see, such as Gustavo mentioned, short, medium, and long term. We have to see in the headquarters what I control, influence, and what I can't control or influence, but I will prepare myself better. This within a context that is important to see to have a real view of is what is a true value chain, not to see the links as independent ones, but think that we have many companies participating. In the end, they have the same objective. We have to serve the client, the customer, to be successful. In the end, all the links must be profitable, healthy. They have to work on a synchronic basis, and I have to understand what is my client in the end of the line, because I need him to survive at the long term. If we think this way, we can plan together. So this is the concept of collaboration communication that is essential to anticipate risks, act proactively, and mitigate what I can, and cooperate more, work together.
In that context, a tool that's what I wanted to share with you that's crucial in our view. It's we call it MMOGLE. It's Material Management Operations Guideline and Logistics Evaluation. What's that tool? In fact, it's a questionnaire, it's a quiz, it's a self-assessment where each company that participates in a chain can understand how they're doing, how they are performing in that chain in several aspects. It was developed in a joint manner. We didn't invent it. We participated together with our OEMs in a global way and some suppliers, together with two groups, one company and a group. The idea is not to advertise this company or the group. They helped us coordinate the ideas and put all that together in such a manner that we would have a complementation of some standards and practice related to quality, to the productive processes from the standpoint of supply chain. And annually, we ask all participants of the chain to fill out this form, especially those who do not have such a global structure and they don't have the support to be able to walk by themselves facing those risks that I talked about. It's a questionnaire. It's not something that GM fills out, or it's the sponsor or has any commercial interest in the tool itself. It's not a quality assessment. It's an assessment of your chain and how you approach different aspects of that chain. It's a questionnaire that's purchased. The value is really low, some tens of dollars. It's very small compared to the gain that you will have. As I said, it was developed, and it's important to give credit by several OEMs and some suppliers that participate actively in that. And it seeks to make improvements in the chain. We seek to understand the processes that each one has in their chain. It's obvious that it will occasionally be linked to costs, and as you optimize logistics process and management of chain, you can reduce the costs that you have for preparing for risks in that chain. It brings risk reduction and an ongoing improvement into what we can offer to our customers. Each one of the links, it's much more proactive than reactive. So another approach would be to simply say, I'm not going to do any of that, and I'm going to wait, and as the risk reaches me, I will react to risk, and I can be successful. I can act in a very optimized way. I'm very good at that, and I don't cause greater impacts. But the reaction is not going to work statistically in all cases, and you may have lower costs, but when you have negative results, you will end up by affecting the whole chain. And but the competitiveness gives us a chain that's stronger. The supply chain is so much stronger than the weakest link in the chain. We can't manage if we carry out risk prevention, if the link which is weak breaks, I'm going to interrupt the whole chain. So for us, it's very important. For an O&M, it's essential that we start to understand what there is behind them. Our relations until some years ago was with the same tier of suppliers. Now we see beyond that. It's always our first contacts with that first tiers that will provide us the data of this questionnaire or form. The idea afterwards is to go deeper and motivate the chain to extrapolate that. It's very complex. It's not a simple quiz. It has 6 chapters in 30 subchapters, and at the end 197 criteria to assess how you're dealing with your chain, with your supply chain. It goes from concepts and theoretical concepts and strategies for ongoing improvement till the interface with my suppliers. So we start to understand how I deal, how I pass the scheduling, how I do the assessment of scheduling, how do I analyze where I have the risks along my logistics chain. There's a series of aspects, and my idea is not to share the 197 questions or themes addressed, but draw your attention to the complexity that there's behind all that. Because when it's well done, this questionnaire can give us extremely high gains, and then we start to collaborate. At the end of the day, we can give a classification of A, B, and C for the companies associated with colors, red, yellow, and green. I'm afraid that maybe colors bring negative ideas in that relation. So potentially, if a company is red today, it seems that we will penalize or use that to judge that company as a bad partner. But the intent is not to do that and penalizing, not penalizing either. The idea is to identify the weaknesses so that we work on that. What's our interest? Is to have a stronger chain. Our interest, it's no good to get concerned in reinforcing my processes as an O&M, work to do everything the best way possible, and avoid risks. And a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 can cause problems in my production. I failed in the end. So as an O&M, I'm not going to have the final product that I needed. So it's very important, and this judgment, this classification here, it's not an idea of classifying companies for more or less business, classify them for more or less relations. On the contrary, I would say that a company that openly manages to bring a red result is the partner that we want. It's the partner that comes and works with us so that together we improve the chain. That momentum is not that where we have discussions that sometimes can be antagonic, but at the end of the day it's not. It's the time when we have the same purpose. This questionnaire, or this tool, we use as a common language instead of carrying out a work that's customized for each company. The questionnaire brings a unique soul language, as if I had an easiness of understanding the themes to be able to approach as a provider quickly. How am I going to resolve that risk? Be it that which is under my control. If it's under my control, I can act. Maybe I can influence, or maybe together within a synthesis or as a category I can influence and work. Whatever is out of our control, out of our influence, but we do recognize, and together we develop plans to address scenarios. Even if you can't control or influence, you work with scenarios. We see the scenarios, we understand what to do with each one of them. That's our primary role. The idea of the of the chain asking for pieces. It's no good anymore. We have to have intelligence in the chain to bring what's the best in all of the people in that chain for joint collaboration. Then we will progress. That's what I wanted to share with you. That was the tool I wanted to show you. Thank you. Muito bem, obrigada, Fred.
Again, giving us a good overview, firstly, of the tremendous complexity that GM is managing in Brazil, and then pointed to, obviously, a useful tool that many of you are probably familiar with that you can use to test your supply chain and to mitigate risk. I like the comment especially that the company that brings or is open about its weak points and comes openly with maybe the red mark is one that you should want to work with so that you can make improvements together. I think that's actually quite a good point. Next up, Alex Feijolo from big global logistics provider GEFCO.
Thank you.
Bom dia a todos.
I would like to thank for the opportunity of being able to be here on behalf of GEFCO for an audience such as this. I would like to thank for the opportunity. My purpose is to share with you how we see the risk issue in line with what Fred talked about, but from the more practical daily standpoint. I'd like to show you two business cases that we had at GEFCO of dealing with risks, and I hope it's interesting for you. I would ask you to talk very quickly about GEFCO. It's just one slide. I'm not going to take too much time, just to show you who we are, talk a little bit about the supply chain scenario. Gustavo and the other lecturers that were here in the first panel talked a lot about this, but I think that's important to get in line with that, talk about risk, as I said, and the two business cases. So very quickly, talking about GEFCO, we are today one of the 10 largest European logistics operators with 4 billion euros. We have a bit more than 1,000 employees, 11,000 employees. We have in 71 countries when we're talking about people. And the fact that's important also for this audience is that we were born in the automobile industries over 6 years ago. We have clients in other segments, but the automobile industry is our specialty around the world. Talking about the scenario, as I said, we saw a lot where we are, how the supply chain or the automotive supply chain is in the scenario. It's the most complex of all. We saw all the data. Fred showed a little bit of the figures. Gustavo also showed the players' figures. Nobody has any doubts about that. But the O&Ms are deeply integrated with all the suppliers, especially the part suppliers, that they are totally inside the chain. And one thing that Fred said that has changed a little bit, but the view that we used to have so far was that the O&Ms normally have a very a view that's very close to tier 1, but it's difficult to control due to the complexity. And the level of inventories that we work with has always been very low, and it reduces more and more, especially after the 2008 crisis. These inventories are still more reduced. All the companies, a good part of them, saw that having free cash flow is very important to survive the crisis. In the uncertainty scenarios, in crisis scenarios, this intensifies even further. In a complex chain with a low level of inventories, we live there in our daily routines. It's no news for anyone. A market that's highly competitive and unstable, growingly unstable. We saw the anticipations, how the market should behave. Sometimes it goes that way, some other times it doesn't. And I think that the common point is that nobody's certain about that if that's going to happen. In Brazil, it's even more difficult. We're talking globally. It's already a very unstable market. And in Brazil, this is even larger. In this scenario, the postponement concepts becomes more and more important. We don't want to have high inventory. It's a very competitive and unstable market, so the more I can delay the finalization of my products, more interesting, but it increases complexity. The forecasting that's so important will never be enough for us to plan the whole chain just based on forecasts. And what we think really is to have a supply chain that's very flexible. In a complex scenario, this is even more complex. Then talking a little bit specifically about Brazil, I'm not going to extend myself in that. Brazil with continental borders. We talked about monomodality. We are a country that's fundamentally road transportation. The ports, we already talked about it. Last year we saw some statistic data in the automotive business that when we compare productivity of one employed in Brazil in the floor of a plant, it's 20% of the productivity that we have in the United States. Then we saw the competitive and logistics competitivity, so productivity is a great bottleneck for us in Brazil. And risk management is always a problem. Like Freddy showed us a tool that's quite interesting at several levels. Each company is working with that tool in a different manner, but everybody's looking at risk and trying to manage it the best way possible. I'm going to split these risks, two types of different risks. The first ones are the deviations, and then we'll talk about disruptions and disasters, and under our standpoint, bringing examples of what happened to us in the past few years, and this should be addressed in a different way, and we're doing so. The common point is here is that the better the collaboration, the better flow of communication with of the players in this chain, the impact of the risk will be smaller. We cannot anticipate risk, or the cost is so high that it's not worth it. But if I am close to my suppliers, the impact will be lower or smaller. Dividing it, so what we call deviations are those risks that we can anticipate or manage, and then we have several tools and other things to be able to manage this risk. Disruption are things that we cannot anticipate, and we don't have a way of avoiding it. So it's cheaper to deal with the disruption when it happens than anticipating it, or working on it in a preventive manner. And disasters, the chain is totally destroyed. Oh, the company no longer exists, or the whole supply chain does no longer exist. So it doesn't nothing to be done about it. So where are we? Now, a concept that's a bit different is disruption. So for deviations, we have several tools, complex tools like Fred explained, the EGM, and simple tools that everyone in this room, I'm sure, have already seen or has worked with them, which is make a decision as to probability and the impact that this risk has on my business. So we have several tools for that. I'm not going to extend myself. And in case of disruption, there is a concept that I see a few people in logistics talking about it, but it's not anything that's not daily routine, which is resilience. This comes from mechanics, which is the capacity that we have to go back to the original state, and it's very similar to that. And as from the time when I have a disruption in my business, how long do I take to go back to the stage that I was before the disruption? This is a concept that's very interesting. I've seen in some companies and logistics directors already working with that in a more mature manner, but I don't see a lot of investments. Very few of our clients have accessed resilience, investing in resilience in a structured manner. And then we have the Harvard Business School review in an article that says surprises are the new normal. We have no way to work without it, and resilience is the new norm. Since I'm going to have surprises, depending on the impact, how am I going to react to those surprises? I'm going to show you two business cases. One, we're talking about risk management in our daily lives. How could this become an opportunity? And the other one, we're really talking about resilience. So, energy, it's a global client of ours. It's a very important client in the automotive chain. It's present in 28 countries with 27 plants, practically all over the world. Probably many of you who are here, like you, are present in several OEMs. Here we have some figures, key figures. One in every five automotive plastic fuel systems are from energy, are made by energy. And what was the context that we had when we started this project together with energy? As I said, it was a global player, growing fast. They opened 7 new plants in 6 countries in a year's time. And what they saw as problems when they invited us to carry out this project, increasing the number of plants. The main problem was the visibility that they had of the flows from the standpoint of being low. The increase of plants also brought an increase of the inventories in process, and they were working with the philosophy, the Bush philosophy. I'm going to show you a chart and what they were expecting along this project with us. So the project has had two purposes. First, increasing the visibility of the flows, minimizing flows. That's in the context of risk management. And also the indirect ones. As Fred said, when we start to map risks, many other opportunities come up because we go into the details of the process and everything that's developed in that chain. So we start to question whether there is an opportunity or if there is no waste along that process. So one of the expectations of that project was to reduce the total logistics cost. For the optimization of the load, this is an expertise that GEFCO has. Many in our projects we managed to have very good results as regards the optimization of the use of the space. So, in a very simple and summarized way, the scenario we had was this. There was the O&M with a flow of physical documents, paperwork to suppliers. These suppliers pushed their needs to those who work as an assembly unit for those components, and after assembling the sets they would transfer their inventories to our warehouses, and the O&M already had the push flow from our warehouses, so this would bring inventories along the chain. And so what did we do? How did we start working? The first thing we did, the first measure we took, was to put EDI systems between the O&M and suppliers, and between energy and suppliers, so energy has a little bit more visibility over the needs. A very important point in this project was that we developed a platform jointly, a system for the orders to give visibility to everyone. It's a very light system. It can be done via web, and it allows all the players to have real-time information at the same time. And with these two actions, we did no longer have this paperwork flow, and we started to have an information flow. With that information flow, one of the problems, one of the objectives that we had was to reduce inventories along the chain, throughout the chain, and with this information flowing more rapidly and more naturally, we managed to get rid of the push flows and and we transform them in pull flows. So the chain starts with working with the same philosophy and the same methodology. This allowed for the reduction of inventories throughout the chain, largely due to the quality of information and the availability of information. Here we talk a little bit about the details of that system, and I'm not going to go into it. You will be able to see that later. It's going to be available. What I would like to share with you is that throughout the development of the systems, an opportunity that came up that didn't exist initially was the management of the packaging throughout the chain. This was not an objective to start with, but when we mapped, packaging was an opportunity for gains that was important, and we included that functionality. A lot of the objectives we managed to attain with this project. So the cost reduction of inventories was aligned with the expectation that the client had initially. The total cost we managed to also to reduce quite a bit, and the main objective, which was to increase visibility of the client throughout the chain, was also reached. But a good part of it was in addition to the methodology, the implementation of the system. So this case is there was some deviation from the standpoint of the client, and we managed to work on these deviations. The second case that I want to share with you, it's a scenario that's totally different. We all followed in 2011 the problems that happened in Tunisia. Tunisia is an important country for the European OEMs. Many suppliers are in that country. And how do you do logistics in a scenario like that? People on the streets, it's catastrophic. So how am I going to anticipate that is going to happen? It's so difficult. So these are real disruptions. We cannot not work with that. If we anticipate all your suppliers in all countries, how am I going to foresee that that country is going to go into a war or is going to collapse politically? So what am I going to do in a scenario such as that? A civil war country? No, we didn't have, I'll show you here in the map how our normal process of supply of these O&Ms were, what were the contingencies and what happened. So we lost both the normal flow and contingency flow, and we couldn't do what was planned. So here is just to illustrate our standard process. You would go out of these suppliers in Tunisia via HoHo and would go in to France through the road. The O&Ms were in France. Our contingency plan, if this system was disrupted, our contingency plan would be go via the roads throughout Europe. So we didn't manage to use the contingency because the frontiers of Tunisia were also blocked, in addition to the ports that were also blocked. So what was our solution? Which was very obvious. We did that with the airplanes, and what's more important in this situation is the speed that you can react with. If you're close to your clients and close in having a visibility of your chain, you can react very quickly. If this is a very slow process, you can put all your chain at risk and have several disruptions. So that you have an idea of the size of this business. It's not one charter flight, it's not something normal. We established a new methodology for supplying those plants. At the peak, we had 7 planes dedicated to do that flow. We managed to transport 7,400 pallets through this solution. Obviously, this is not the most economical solution, but it was more economical than the whole disruption that it might bring to the chain. And it's totally unpredictable, as I said before. So what I would like to leave you as our learning from these two GEFCO cases, when we're talking about risk management, in our routine, many times we look at risk management and associated costs. Sometimes this happens, but many times we manage to bring gains to the process. So in the first gains that we saw of energy, we were trying to reduce the chain risk and increase visibility. And we managed to reduce the total cost. This wasn't the objective to start with, but we managed to do that because we work together, we were close, and have the whole chain aligned. Like Fred said and Gustavo said too, it's very important that this is done by four hands. You cannot do that by yourself. So for us, this is the first great learning point. And the second, as regards resilience, it's a very interesting theme. Going back to our companies, it's a theme that we can start thinking about. How close am I to my suppliers to establish a quick reaction, a fast reaction in case of disruption? We know that they can happen. We all do the best for that not to happen, and we are making arrangements and diversifying regions and suppliers. We saw in the first panel some OEMs, Toyota, for example, which had many suppliers in Japan, dislocating them to other parts of the world to avoid disruption. But if the disruption happens, how am I going to react? How is my relationship with my suppliers? So this is the message I would like to leave for you. Thank you very much. Here are my contact numbers. Feel free to contact me in case you have any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex. Again, I think some useful case studies there, looking at ways to mitigate risk across the supply chain, from a kind of, let's say, medium long-term planning to reaction to crises and such. And I'm sure these are all situations that are very, very relevant in the context of Brazil and South America and some of the instability that we've been discussing so far. I'd like to open the session now to Q&A. If you have any questions, please put your hand up, say your name, company. Again, a reminder, you can ask the question in Portuguese or English. Indeed, any comments or other points you'd like to add to the discussion from your company's perspective as well, these are also very, very welcome. Do we have any questions from the floor to kick off? We have a question right in the front.
Hello, my question is to Fred. That questionnaire you showed, I thought it was very interesting, but as you said, it is complex. When you give this to the suppliers, how do you manage information and how do you create solutions? Because I used to say that sometimes you know the problem, but you don't take the action to solve this. If you gather a group in your company and ask, what's the problem of the company? They know the problems, and many know the solution, but they don't put this into practice. This is a big difficulty. How do you deal with this? I'll talk about this in three phases. We will not distribute this to the companies. As the questionnaire is done together with several OMs, and we have a company that manages this, that's RG and all that. And it is exactly for us not to do this with the suppliers. They contact us and they will provide data. Second, the management of this data is organized by this company. I think it's $100 to participate. They manage this and put on a legible format. The third point that is quite right, what's the difficulty to deal with this data? I should be honest, the greatest difficulty we have today is that I see that most of the companies, when they fill the questionnaire, when they participate, they try to state everything positively. They say, I have a plan, and answers are many. I have a plan to make the interface with your suppliers and to make sure they understood your objectives. So that's why I emphasized in the end the issue that to be read in the questionnaire is not bad. 99% of cases that answered are like this. And on daily routine, when we see the problems, we notice that it was not exactly green. We are afraid that you use the red information to judge the company or to avoid working with the company. It's the opposite. I like when I see the red in advance because I can plan myself. This is the challenge. We have 40%, it's our suppliers base, first year, 40%, less than half. From these 40, 99%, all the questions are green, and we see that every day they are not completely green. I do understand because it we are afraid to cooperate to open my problems to the customer and say, here I don't have a plan, I may have a risk, let's work together. We have to revert this. We have a tool, but we are not using it quite effectively. We have some positive examples, but they are more the exception rather than the rule.
Any other questions? We have a question in the corner, just to the side.
Bom dia a todos.
Good morning. My name is Rui. I am from Magnasit. My question is to Alex. Alex, you comment when you talked about resilience. I see this as an important aspect. How you quickly react in facing a tragedy or any situation, but you also mentioned the issue of cost. My question is, how does this cost is tracked between the involved parts, from the customer, the company, or the chain? How is it tracked? Our board charges us a lot about this. When you have this situation about cost, it is difficult not to take an action. It costs more. But how is this tracked and understood by all the stakeholders? These cases are treated case by case. What's important is to be close so that you may have the trust in the supplier to open the numbers and take the decision quickly. Obviously, we cannot take this decision alone because costs are high. But as we are close, we'll take the decision together and quickly we'll establish confidence between supplier and customer, seeing that solution is the best, but decision taking and costs pricing is done for hands, case by case. Our greatest concern is to establish a relationship of trust, and be speedy in this process. It's not a normal process. I had a rupture in my chain. I go to the market. It will take such a long time that it will cost a lot. So, to answer your question, four hands, case by case, joint decision. Muito obrigado. Temos uma pergunta aqui. Good morning, I am Rui Galvão. I'm from Velox Logística. My question is to Alex. As to productivity, we talk about our problems in productivity. And you mentioned a difference in the US. You said that ours is 20%. What is the relation that you see between our relationship that is compared to the states that we stay quite below? The data I'm using, they showed a panel where they compared the automobile industry in Brazil and the American. When we compared with added value by men in the industry on a total basis, this is 1/5 of the American industry. This was one of the questions posed to that executive at that time. Why is the car so more expensive than it is in Europe? This was involved, all these costs, etc. And in this figure, we have the accounting, the financial complexity we have, automation. When I'm talking about this information we have, do you have this number, Fred? As I understood, this is a very public number. People can access easily. I can see this later on and give this to you. I have the presentation and I can send you the source.
We're talking kind of generally about risk management and things like that. But in terms of what you're seeing in Brazil and South America, say over the last year, in terms of premium freight or things like that, I mean, can you point to any trends or things, perhaps starting with GM, that you've been doing to try to reduce this number? Has it been stable? Has it been going up? And maybe GEFCO, you can speak from that experience as well.
If I may start.
Yeah, you can.
Da nossa
As I
perspectiva.
mentioned, we have several types of risks, and it's pretty common. I think it was mentioned. The normal today is that you need to be resilient because you always have the challenges and the changes in the day-to-day. So it's a true fact. What I see is that we are more used to talk about risks in the infrastructure, risks in the flows themselves, risks that you can see. Maybe hardware risks, you can call those. The ones that I mentioned. Those risks are very common. But we are anticipating that we have other types of risks too. We are very good at dealing with the risks that are clear to see. We are not very good on dealing with risks that are not so clear, not so physical. I mentioned commercial or relationship risks, things that can disrupt, for example, a supplier in a certain situation in the market that is going in a difficult financial difficulty. We need to anticipate that, and you don't see this type of risk very easily. You need to dig information, you need to talk, you need to discuss. It's not so easy. So we need to get prepared to these types of risks, planning risks. Sometimes we don't make a very robust planning, and we will pay the price later. So we need to be more proactive to identify our planning risks and anticipate or mitigate the things that we cannot change completely. So we are good at dealing with some of the risks, but others we need still to learn a little more and put more effort. But I reinforce, we only do that as a whole in the chain. To do that isolated is, in my view, is a failure. It will not be a true good analysis. We need to do that together.
Sorry, I will speak in Portuguese if you don't mind.
Please, yeah, please.
Bom, sob nosso ponto de vista, bastante alinhado.
I think this is aligned with what Fred said. The automobile chain is demanding when we talk about transportation. It's a very nervous chain. We are here among suppliers and the car industry, the OEMs. Our daily life is challenging with all the uncertainties. The easy or the fragile points. We do this every day. We try not to leave the risk reaching the end. The challenge is to keep the lines working. This is frequent in Brazil. We have a special challenge as we are a country on highways. The premium that would be in Europe, we are talking about daily life. Europe is United States Railroad. It's here we would have more roads. If I have a rupture and the highway transportation, it's something special. It takes long to react. And we live this in our daily routine. And fortunately, we don't have ruptures as such as wars, etc. Would be more severe.
Any other questions from the audience at this point? Okay, another point, that I discussed with Edgar Pezzo in the article that is in the magazine is supply localization and trying to increase that. And he points specifically at South America, but obviously it was in the context of other emerging markets as well. And Fred, again, sorry to pick on you there, but maybe you want to talk about progress. Your slide showed the numbers of containers per day. Is that increasing? Have you succeeded in localizing more suppliers? And how does logistics and supply chain sort of help you to negotiate with the suppliers to bring them closer to your plants?
This is one of the topics that we spent a long time in the last years. Global sourcing or international supply base is something that we use extensively, not only us, I think everybody uses it extensively. It was not just for the cost, but for the speed to bring to the market the vehicles that we needed to. If you need to bring a global vehicle and you want to be fast, eventually it makes sense that most of the parts that you bring from the original suppliers where they are already producing that vehicle. So this can be a strategy, but also this is risk. This brings risk to our supply chain, and for sure it's a high logistics cost. We learned over time that there is some global sourcing that makes sense, and there are others that we need to work to mitigate the risk, and eventually not just think about the immediate costs that you have, but to think about the medium and long term in the supply base. So it's very important that we also work and develop the local supply base, balancing with your global sourcing. We learned that it mitigates risk. Eventually there's a price associated to that, an immediate price, but in the overall for us, it makes sense because you need to see the total cost, including total costs, looking into scenarios of this risk disrupting you, or eventually the cost for you to mitigate the possibility of this risk of disruption. So when you put all this into an equation, it makes sense, medium, long term. So we are learning to do that. We have some tools to do that. We have some concepts behind. For sure, supplier footprint is a key element in the risk. If we had everything international, that would be probably unmanageable for us. So we are balancing. That means we will have everything local, always know. Like I said, there are things that make sense. There are things that you don't produce here. And there are other things that you have a very good and solid supply base that makes sense to develop here. We are, I would say, in a journey, a lot better than 2 years ago, but I believe that we are still not there. We are going to be even better in 2 years from now.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments from the audience at this point? Maybe a question for Alex at GEFCO, since a lot of, well, I'm not sure if it's most of what you do, but you're very involved with moving international freight, particularly for PSA, but I'm sure for other customers. Where do you see the biggest gaps right now in the international chain? I mean, Fred showed a slide in the beginning of all the pieces and all the points which are quite complex. I mean, for you, is it visibility? Are there IT solutions that could bring it better together? Or is it a lack of integration between freight forwarders, et cetera? I mean, from your point of view, what would you like to see improved?
Você diz internacionalmente ou internacionalmente? É ponto muito complexo. We have many challenges here, but I think that this permeates infrastructure in Brazil. Whenever we are talking about international flows, the constraints and ports, they are such a big problem. The documents, bureaucracy, you need much effort to deal with the bureaucratic complexity that is to import in Brazil. We've been participating on some projects of OEMs that are coming and arriving in Brazil. And in some situations, when we started doing the details to enter Brazil with the product. These newcomers, they do not believe that it shouldn't be so. They do not believe time and complexity as well. I believe this is the greatest challenge besides the logistic challenge that is the same for all countries to move parts from one continent to the other. It's the same challenge for everyone. But when you arrive in the country, it takes such a long time and it costs so much to enter this country and to export also. I think this is the greatest problem we have now today in Brasil. Eu
It's
acho
very
que
important and
uma
it's
coisa que é
calling my
muito
attention more and
importante
more.
para
We
nós
put a lot of efforts over time in the physical movements and we pay a lot of attention on what's happening. And I think there's a certain sophistication on how we handle the materials. But information, it's quite important, and I wouldn't say more important than the material because the material is what we use to produce the vehicle, but the information is key. And sometimes I see that we are still failing a lot in the information flows from both sides. The information is both sides. So I have a strong concern if I'm passing my right information to my supply base in the best format in a way that they can understand, if I'm passing through everyone in the right speed, because if I don't do that as a customer, I'll be failing on providing the most updated need or data that I have about what I'm expecting. And if it doesn't flow through all the links, and I see that sometimes it doesn't happen, we may have a high risk, either a risk of disruption or a risk of cost, because we may have like excess inventory, overproduction, and etc. The other way is also important, the information flowing in return to us. If there's an occurrence in the chain, and the chain is long, the international that you mentioned, we need to understand very well quickly what's happening. Like an email is not enough. Today people send email and I have the sense that this is the best flow of communication. I don't think it is. We need to have something faster. We need to have more updated information right on time. And this is an area that we need to spend more time on planning and understanding how we communicate through the chain. Having web-based tools, for example, I think it's a good solution so everybody can see what's happening there, what's being scheduled, occurrences being shared with everyone, so we can plan together in a reliable and fast information. I think this is a big challenge, the information flow.
Absolutely. Okay, we have some question now.
Newton Caraçawa, GM. Bom,
Karasawa, GM. Congratulations, Fred and Alex, for your presentations. Alex, you mentioned the resilience and the importance of this in the supply chain. When we talk under the view of the logistic, how do you see today that the market, the companies, they give importance to a recovery plan in a decision taking when an operator is nominated? Excellent question. I think this is getting important. So to those drifts or deviations, this comes to us in the process of hiring. This is a strong demand. I have to understand how you act under these situations. What is missing is something connected to rupture and with being more agile in the chain to not to have this breakage. We see that the concern is greater and greater, and I believe that the movement of inventory reduction brings clients the need of understanding how the operator or the supplier will react in a situation not quite a common situation. And so I think there's a lot to be done yet. As to these ruptures, it is to be close knowledge, opening the information, as Fred said, to anticipately see the information, and something we miss in our customers is that information to the factory, to the plant, to the OM is flexible. You have anticipation. For us operator, this comes in the last minute, and this generates not such a strategic information. And I think it's like this: the plan to recover from a rupture, it's much easier when you have this relationship. But the concern is greater in all with all our customers.
Any other points or questions? I wanted to talk a little bit about, I mean, we've been talking a lot about short-term, medium-term, and long-term, but what about advanced sort of planning? I mean, if we talk about vehicle development, that might be 3 or 4 years before the start of production. Fred, again, starting with you on this one, because this was another point that I've been discussing with GM, not just, and pretty much everywhere. And I'm not sure how it relates to Brazil. So, you know, how closely are you or your team working with engineers, with product development, with engineering, manufacturing, et cetera, purchasing, to try and influence the supply chain before it's even born, so to speak?
This is an important theme for us too. We call more recently inside GM, we need to work more in the left. And this is just because we have a global vehicle development process for our vehicles. That is, like you said, it's 3, 4, sometimes 5 years. It's a big process that if you put in a page, it starts in the left and it ends in the right when we launch the vehicle. So we say that we need to work more in the left, in the early stages of the development. So my team in supply chain first needs to work very close with the logistics team, and we team up to go and work more closely with the early phases of purchasing, in the development of who will be our supply base or suppliers involved, where are they located, what are the solutions, if this part, for example, is going to be a subsystem that will come to us assemble, or it will be components that we will assemble in the plant. This is what I call working in the left side, working in the early stages, sometimes 3 years before the vehicle will be launched. But it's necessary because we know that if we don't interfere or influence that moment, we may not like the decision that is taken and the impacts in the whole chain. So we put our expertise together as supply chain logistics to understand or participate in the decision as early as possible, as early as even before we are talking about the supply base, but before, like I mentioned, how I'm going to buy those components, which type of setup I will have. This is key for us, not only in terms of cost, but also in terms of risk. The definition of footprint is one of the definitions, but there are several others. But for sure, working in the left is the right thing to do, and this is a key for us. We didn't used to do that. If 3 years ago, we didn't used to do that at all. And we are learning now how, again, we can participate. And this is strange, even internally, because people say, why are we interacting with supply chain logistics in this point in time? Engineering will say, why are you involved so early in the project? Because, and we need to educate everybody to understand, because if I don't do that, the decisions taken later may not be the optimum solution or the best possible solution for the whole organization and for the whole chain. So this is key for us now. And Gary is very vocal about that, I think, in his global leadership for logistics too.
Indeed. Maybe following from that, for Alex to start with, and Fred, you can comment as well, what role does a logistics, or can a logistics provider have in that early planning phase? I mean, you were talking internal things with GM, but where is there scope for a logistics provider to get involved, whether it's carrying out studies or looking at different strategies? So perhaps starting with Alex from a GEFCO point of view, where that's relevant to what you're doing, or what you see, or where you see it can be done better or more.
Bom, para a gente é muito importante a gente
It's important
o caminho que a logística veio se desenvolvendo e
for this way logistic is taking. The demand the logistic operators have today are more sophisticated than they were years ago. We have some operators here, I think you will all agree with me. In our structures, we have engineering area, project area. They are there because we have demands from our customers and we see where we can add value. The earlier we can enter, participate of the projects, I think that we'll add more value. On the standpoint of the operator, is different for us when we are invited to participate of the launching of a vehicle. Any type of project, it's different than receiving a RFQ after things are running, or the risk. You don't have a deep knowledge of that aspect, and so you insert risk in your project. If we are involved early on, this risk is known and doesn't show up. In the end, it is overpriced and that wouldn't need to be there. We as GEFCO, we are successful with our customers. It starts when designing the project and then we can add value. Many times is receiving the whole process ready. We can participate very little. We as operator, this is the best scenario to enter the project when it is starting.
The SSP, it's being used for parts development too, with the SSP strategic sourcing process. In the past, we used to have our engineering team defining, and I'll give the example on a part, defining the specification in a certain part or system. That would be called an SOR, state of requirements. We would give this to a certain number of suppliers that we believe are capable. They would, it's an RFQ, request for quote. They would provide a quote, and we would make a normal sourcing process, define that based on some criteria, cost, quality, and etc. And we figure out that this is not the best approach. The strategic sourcing process defines that we look into the history of the supply base on dealing with us. We virtually have business with almost every auto parts supplier, and we understand it based in this history, who's the right partner for us to work in a specific system. And we team up, like I mentioned, more to the left in the process with the supplier, and we do engineering together with this. So this supplier is, I would say, pre-selected in a certain way that participates together with our engineering design on making strategic decisions about that subsystem or part. It actually helps to design the SOR of that part or subsystem and help us to make a better subsystem or part. Participate very early in the project, and then we work through the launch or up to the launch of the project on how to make this in the best process with the right cost and quality and technology. So we believe this is the right approach. A strategic sourcing process brings suppliers to the left of the process. In my view, like I presented here, supply chain is a junction of several companies. Some are part suppliers, some are logistics providers, and etc. I think we need to put everyone in the left side of that process, working through the SSP, the strategic sourcing process, to engage as early as possible and in the right moment, each one of the players, when we are designing what we need. Because the true fact is, we are not the only ones in the chain with good ideas. We know everybody can have a good idea. Some will have excellent idea. Most of the time, we have more expertise about a part or about a logistics process or a chain in providers than in our teams. So we need to take advantage of that and put all together as early as possible to have the best solution. So we are actively doing that. Of course, you don't do that for every single part. Nuts and bolts, you don't need to. But in more complex parts, in more strategic parts or systems, it for sure need to do that, as well as when you define what you are working on, you define with your providers in the chain. You engage as early as possible. So we truly believe in that.
Okay, I mean, I think that's obviously a very encouraging point, I think, to perhaps end the session unless we have any other questions. Any last questions or points from the audience? I can see you're all getting hungry now for lunch. But as I mentioned, I think that we started off the session talking about risk mitigation and dealing with anything from catastrophes to issues, and we sort of end on looking way out in advance and involving everybody in the logistics chain and supply chain on taking a more strategic approach. So I think that's at least one way that we can look to make the Brazilian supply chain more competitive. So I'd like to now invite you all to join us for lunch, which is next door, hosted by our sponsor, Syncrian. So we'll come back here afterwards, but please enjoy the meal. Thank you.